A single impulsive decision in a fluorescent-lit hallway was all it took to permanently unravel Teagan Briars' carefully constructed life. She thought she was protecting a helpless stranger from two men who wanted him dead. She pressed her badge against the exam room door and held her ground, completely blind to the catastrophic truth sitting on the other side of that wall. The man she was hiding was not a victim. He was a weapon, and the man who owned him was already on his way. The night had started the way every Wednesday night started for Teagan. Badly. Rush University Medical Center's emergency department at 2 a.m. smelled of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the particular brand of exhaustions that settle into your bones after your 14th consecutive hour on shift. Teagan was in her second year of the accelerated nursing program at Rush, which meant she clocked clinical hours the way other people clocked nightmares, frequently and without adequate preparation. At 26, she was older than most of her cohort. She had taken 3 years off after undergrad, working as a pharmacy tech and then as a CNA at the VA hospital on the South Side, scraping together enough money to cover tuition her younger brother Eli had been accumulating since his leukemia diagnosis 18 months ago. The financial aid office at Rush knew her by name. So did the billing department at Lurie Children's Hospital. She did not belong in the world of people who had everything figured out. She belonged in the middle of a 12-bed trauma bay at 2 in the morning, documenting vitals and answering call lights and pretending she wasn't held together entirely by a third cup of terrible vending machine coffee. That was where she was standing, clipboard in hand, coffee going cold, when the automatic bay doors burst open. The paramedics came in fast and loud, the way they always did when something was genuinely bad. Teagan stepped aside instinctively as the gurney rolled past. The patient was male, large, somewhere in his mid-40s. His shirt had been cut away. A compression bandage was packed tight against his left flank, already soaked through. His face was the color of old concrete. He was conscious. Barely. His lips moving without sound. Teagan caught the lead paramedic's eye. "What are we looking at?" GSW to the left lateral abdomen, possible kidney involvement. He was found in the parking garage on Wacker. No wallet, no ID. Bystander called it in. The paramedic paused, voice dropping. "No one was with him when we arrived, but when we were loading him up, 2 guys in a black Tahoe pulled into the lot and then pulled straight back out when they saw us." Teagan filed that away. She had grown up in Bridgeport, the daughter of a retired Chicago PD detective who had spent 22 years in area central homicide. She knew what certain details meant. A gunshot victim with no ID found in a parking garage, 2 vehicles that appeared and disappeared. That was not a random mugging. That was a message that hadn't finished being sent. She helped transfer the patient into Trauma Bay 4 and stayed close while the attending, Dr. Lenora Fitch, ran her assessment. The man's pressure was low but holding. Abdominal rigidity suggested internal bleeding. He needed imaging and likely surgery, but he was not immediately coding. Dr. Fitch called for a CT and stepped out to coordinate with the OR. Teagan was supposed to follow. She didn't. She stood at the threshold of the trauma bay, looking through the narrow window in the door toward the waiting area. 2 men had come in through the main entrance while the trauma team was working. They hadn't gone to the triage desk. They hadn't asked for anyone. They had simply sat down in adjacent chairs near the hallway entrance, the hallway that connected directly to the trauma bays. And they were not looking at their phones. They were not looking at the admissions window. They were watching the corridor. One of them had a neck tattoo disappearing under a high collar. The other had his right hand resting inside his open jacket in a way that Teagan recognized with a cold, sick certainty from every conversation her father had ever had about people who carried concealed weapons and didn't bother to hide the habit because they didn't have to. "Oh no," she murmured. "No, no, no." The transport tech arrived to wheel the patient to CT. Teagan stepped in front of the gurney. "I'll take him," she said, grabbing the rail. The tech blinked. "You don't have to." "I want the practice," Teagan said firmly. It wasn't even entirely a lie. She gripped the gurney and pushed it briskly to the left away from the main corridor, down the back service hallway that ran parallel to the trauma bays and connected to the imaging wing via the staff-only route. The man on the gurney grabbed her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong for someone who had lost that much blood. "Don't," his voice was a ragged whisper, "don't take me to the machine. Don't let them see where I am." Teagan looked down at him. His eyes were open now, dark and urgent. Up close she could see more. The edge of a tattoo beneath his right ear, the kind of definition in his jaw that came from years of physical discipline, the way he tracked the hallway with his eyes, even while lying flat on a moving gurney. "The two men in the waiting area," she said quietly. His jaw tightened. That was answer enough. Teagan made a decision that her father would have called catastrophically stupid and her nursing instructors would have called a termination-level offense. She diverted the gurney into a small procedure room at the end of the back hallway, the one used for minor suturing, with no internal camera and a door that locked from the inside. She got him in, locked the door, and pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. "I'm Teagan," she said. "I'm going to assess your wound while you tell me what's happening." The man stared at her for a long moment. "Dario," he said finally. "My name is Dario." "Okay, Dario." Teagan began cutting away the saturated compression bandage with trauma shears. "The two men in the waiting area, are they armed?" "Yes." "Are they going to hurt anyone else in this hospital?" "Only me. Only if they find me." "Then they're not going to find you." She wasn't entirely sure why she said it with that level of conviction. She had no plan beyond the next 30 seconds. But she had packed wounds at the VA. She had assisted in 3 emergency laparotomies during her clinical rotations, and the lateral abdominal wound she uncovered when she peeled back the soaked gauze was severe but survivable if she could control the hemorrhage. She packed it. She elevated his legs with a folded blanket. She hung a saline bag from the IV hook and ran it wide open. From her phone, hospital number blocked, she texted the charge nurse. "Patient in Bay 4 is my family. I'm with him. Don't send anyone yet, please." Nurse Pacheco had known Teagan for 6 months. She trusted her. The response came back in 40 seconds. "You have 10 min, then I'm coming myself." Teagan spent those 10 minutes the way she'd spent most of the last 2 years. Doing something that was slightly beyond what she was actually qualified to do, and doing it anyway because the alternative was worse. She didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway until they stopped directly outside the door. The knock came hard, not the tentative knock of a nurse, not the administrative double tap of administration, 3 heavy impacts with the flat of a hand. Teagan looked at Dario. His face had gone even paler, but his eyes were completely focused. "Is there another exit?" he breathed. She shook her head slightly. She pressed her back against the door and looked around the room. Procedure table, supply cart, sharps disposal on the wall, the small interior window of frosted glass that looked out onto the service corridor. The knock came again, harder. "Hospital staff," Teagan called out, her voice steady in a way that her heartbeat absolutely was not. "This room is occupied. Please return to the waiting area." A long silence. Then the doorknob moved. It rattled once, twice against the lock. Teagan gripped the counter behind her and breathed. The footsteps retreated. She waited 30 seconds before she allowed herself to exhale. She was looking at Dario, calculating his pressure against his color, against the fluid going in when the hallway outside erupted. Not the 2 men. Something else. A controlled, authoritative kind of commotion that she recognized before she consciously understood why, the sound of multiple bodies moving in coordinated formation, low voices issuing instructions, the particular silence that falls over a space when the people in it suddenly realize the hierarchy has shifted. Then nothing. Then a single deliberate knock. "Mrs. Briars." The voice was male, quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't need volume to make itself heard through a solid door. "Open the door. I give you my word that nothing in this room will be harmed." Teagan did not open the door. "I don't know who you are," she said. "No," the voice agreed. "You don't, but Dario does, and I think you know that whatever you imagine I might be, I am not the threat in this building tonight. The threat is already being handled. Open the door." She looked at Dario. Dario closed his eyes for a brief moment. "Open it," he said. "It's the boss." Teagan unlocked the door. The man who stepped into the procedure room was not what she had been picturing. She had been picturing someone loud, someone who announced himself through sheer volume or menace, who wore his authority like a costume. This man wore a charcoal canali suit over a dark shirt, no tie. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of build that suggested structural rather than decorative muscle. His face was all sharp angles, dark eyes, a scar bisecting his left eyebrow in a thin, pale line. He wasn't young, mid to late 30s maybe, and he moved through the doorway the way experienced surgeons move into an oar, completely certain of every inch of the space before they occupy it. He looked at Dario first. One swift assessment, the kind that takes in everything and reveals nothing. Then he looked at Teagan. "What is your level of training?" he asked. "Not who are you, not what did you do, what is your training?" She filed that away. "Second-year accelerated nursing program," she said, 4 years as a CNA before that. "You packed this wound yourself?" It wasn't a question, he was looking at the dressing. "Yes." "It's correctly done." He said it the way someone states a fact, not a compliment, just an accurate observation. The 2 men in the waiting area were Serbian, associates of a rival organization, who have been attempting to remove Dario from the equation for the better part of 6 months. They have been removed from this building, however. He paused. He was still looking at her. "However," he continued, "you used your badge to divert this patient off route. Your face is on 3 separate camera feeds in this hallway. You texted the charge nurse from your personal phone. By morning, the people who sent those 2 men will know exactly who redirected their target. They will find your employee file. They will find your address." Teagan felt the bottom of her stomach drop away. "My name is Corvin Blackwell," the man said. "Dario Senna is my chief of operations. You kept him alive for the last 14 minutes, and for that I owe you something significant, but what I owe you cannot be paid here. You need to leave this building with me, now." "I have a shift," Teagan said, because her brain had apparently defaulted to the single most irrelevant fact in the room. Corvin Blackwell looked at her for exactly 1 second. "I am aware of that," he said. "I am also aware that your brother Eli is currently receiving treatment at Lurie Children's Hospital, that your lease in Bridgeport expires in January, that you are enrolled in 4 clinical courses this semester, and that you are $11,000 behind on your last tuition installment." The air went out of the room. "How do you know any of that?" she said quietly. "Because in the 60 seconds it took my team to clear this corridor," he said. "I made 2 phone calls." He held her gaze. "Come with me. I will explain everything in the vehicle. But we need to move." She wanted to refuse every reasonable instinct she had said to refuse, to demand that he leave, to call security, to call her father. Then she thought about her face on the camera feeds. She thought about the type of people who sent 2 armed men into a hospital to finish what they started in a parking garage. She thought about Eli, 22 years old, 60 pounds underweight, sitting in a recliner at Lurie while a bag of chemotherapy dripped into his port. "Let me get my coat," she said. The black SUV moved through Chicago's nighttime grid with the smooth authority of a vehicle that never stopped for red lights it didn't want to. Teagan sat in the back seat beside Corvin Blackwell, separated by exactly 12 inches of black leather upholstery, and tried to organize the last 40 minutes into something her nervous system could process. Dario was in the second vehicle, stable moving. "Where are we going?" she asked. "A property on the North Shore," Corvin said. "The organization maintains a medical facility there for exactly these situations." He glanced at her. "There is equipment. There will be supplies." "Then why do you need me?" Because the physician on staff is not available tonight. He said it without elaborating. And because Dario's condition is going to deteriorate within the next 2 hours if the internal bleeding isn't definitively addressed. The CT he didn't receive showed, he checked his phone, active hemorrhage at the inferior pole of the left kidney. He needs interventional radiology or surgical exploration. Teagan stared at him. You got his CT results. I have an arrangement with the radiology department. He said it the same way he said everything, as if it was simply the state of the world. I'm a nursing student, she said. I have assisted in 3 abdominal surgeries. I am not a surgeon. No, Corvin agreed, but you are what is available, and I watched you pack a gunshot wound in a supply closet with materials that were not intended for that purpose, and you did it correctly. He turned to look at her fully. In the amber light of the expressway, his dark eyes were unreadable. I don't ask for things people cannot give. They drove north in silence. Then the world cracked open. The first explosion came from behind. Not a crash, not the sound of an accident, but the distinctive concussive crack of a shaped charge detonating against armored plating. The vehicle swerved violently. Teagan's seatbelt locked hard across her chest as the SUV's rear quarter panel absorbed an impact that rocked the entire frame sideways. Contact rear, the driver said very calmly. Push through, Corvin said, and then his hand was on Teagan's arm, not gripping, just present and certain. Stay low, against me. She didn't think. She folded sideways, her shoulder against his chest as the rear window went white with spiderweb fractures from automatic weapons fire. The reinforced laminate held. The SUV accelerated. She heard the second vehicle behind them responding, heard shouting in a language she didn't recognize, heard 2 sharp, controlled bursts from somewhere above and ahead. Then the shooting stopped. The driver took 3 more turns in rapid succession, and they were on surface streets, moving at normal speed, and the night outside the tinted windows was quiet again. Teagan straightened slowly. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at them and pressed them flat against her thighs. Breathe, Corvin said quietly. He had not moved away from her. I am breathing, she said. Her voice was admirably steady. You're not, actually. She forced a long, deliberate inhale, held it, released it. Better, he said. The North Shore property announced itself through a pair of iron gates, set into a high stone wall, the kind of wall that was decorative, only in the sense that it also happened to be impenetrable. Beyond the gates, a long private drive wound through dark manicured grounds toward a house that was large enough to have its own staff wing. Lights were already on inside. They brought Dario through a side entrance and down a flight of stairs into a basement level that looked nothing like a basement. The ceilings were high and clean. The lighting was surgical. There was a proper operating table under a hinged overhead lamp, an anesthesia machine, a locked glass cabinet stocked with medications Teagan recognized from hospital formularies, and a cardiac monitor that was better than half the ones on her clinical floor. She stopped in the doorway and took it all in. Your father built the bunker, she said. You just upgraded it. Corvin looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, the smallest degree of surprise. How did you know it was my father? The equipment is a mixed generation, older structural bones, newer instruments. Someone retrofitted this over time, not all at once. She moved into the room and began reading cabinet labels. The physician who isn't available tonight. Died 3 months ago, he said. Natural causes. I haven't found a replacement, I trust. O-negative blood in a compact refrigeration unit, hemostatic gauze, irrigation supplies. A full trauma kit. She found the interventional equipment shoved against the far wall, an older model but functional, a portable fluoroscopy unit she had used once in a simulation lab at Rush. I cannot operate independently, she said. But I can do damage control. I can pack the hemorrhage site, place a drain, hold the pressure steady enough that he can get to an actual ore in the morning. She turned around to find Corvin standing directly behind her. He hadn't made a sound crossing the room. Then do that, he said. I need you to assist. I need you to do what I say when I say it, without asking why. Can you do that?" He held her gaze. "Yes. Wash your hands." For the next 90 minutes, the basement of Corvin Blackwell's North Shore property became, improbably, the most focused Teagan had ever been in her entire life. She worked by instinct and by memory, by the trauma protocols she had studied, the procedures she had watched and assisted and practiced on mannequins in simulation labs, and by the specific clarifying calm that descends on certain people when the stakes become high enough that there is simply no room left for anything except the work itself. She irrigated the wound site. She found the arterial bleeder, a branch of the renal artery hemorrhaging steadily but not catastrophically, and she packed it with precision. She placed the drain. She talked Corvin through every step of what she needed him to hold, hand over, press, read aloud from the monitor. He did it without hesitation. His hands were completely steady. He didn't flinch once. When she finally stepped back from the table, Dario's pressure had stabilized. The drain was outputting clean fluid, and the cardiac monitor was reading a rhythm that was no longer trying to kill him. Teagan stripped off her gloves and dropped them in the red bin. She was covered in blood from the elbows down and so tired that her vision had gone slightly soft at the edges. She leaned against the counter and breathed. Corvin stood on the other side of the table, washing his hands at the deep utility sink. He dried them slowly, turned around, looked at her. Whatever unreadable version of his expression she had catalogued over the last 2 hours, this was something different, something she didn't have a precise name for yet. "He's going to need a real hospital in the morning," she said. "He needs imaging, he needs a vascular surgeon to properly address the arterial branch, and he needs a full blood workup. Nothing I did tonight is a substitute for that." "I understand," Corvin said. "It will be arranged." "Good." She pushed off the counter. "Then I need to go home." He crossed the room in 4 strides, unhurried, inexorable. He stopped close enough that she had to tip her chin up slightly to meet his eyes. "You cannot go home, Teagan." His voice was completely level, which somehow made it worse. "The men who attacked us tonight were not the same group that sent the 2 into the waiting area. This is a separate party with a separate grievance. By morning, 3 distinct organizations are going to be asking the same question: who is the woman who hid Dario Sina and then disappeared from Rush University Medical Center with Corvin Blackwell?" Teagan held very still. "They will go to your apartment," he continued. "They will go to your brother's hospital. They will use anyone you love to reach me." He reached out and very carefully tucked a strand of her hair back from her face, the gesture oddly precise, like he was correcting something that had been quietly bothering him for the last 2 hours. "I cannot undo what happened tonight. I can only control what happens next." "So what happens next?" she said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended. Corvin Blackwell looked at her for a long moment. The way very controlled people look at something that has completely disrupted their calculations and have not yet decided whether they consider that a liability or something else entirely. "What happens next," he said, "is that you are under my protection. Your brother is under my protection. Every obligation you are carrying, tuition, bills, every outstanding debt becomes my problem, not yours." His hand dropped to his side. "In exchange, you stay close to me. You don't go anywhere I cannot reach you. Not until this is resolved." Teagan stared at him. "You're keeping me here." "I'm keeping you alive," he said it simply. "There is a difference. I will not pretend it isn't inconvenient." That's a remarkably restrained way to describe what this is. You came of your own will, under substantial duress. Yes, he didn't argue the point. "I'm aware that you had no good options tonight, and that I am not the option you would have chosen under different circumstances. I'm also aware that you kept a man alive in a supply closet, using materials that were not designed for that purpose, and then held a hemorrhaging arterial branch under control for 90 minutes in a basement, and that you did not lose your nerve once." He paused. Something moved through his expression that she would think about later, in the quiet room upstairs, for a long time. I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who are afraid of what I am. You're angry at what I am. That is a meaningful distinction." Teagan didn't answer. "There's a room upstairs," Corvin said. "Clean clothes. A phone you can use to call your brother. I'll have someone retrieve your essentials from your apartment before morning." He turned toward the stairs. "You should sleep. Tomorrow is going to be complicated." He was already at the base of the stairs when she said, "Why did you tell me all of that? You didn't have to explain any of it." He stopped. His back was to her. A long beat passed in the clean, humming silence of the surgical suite. "Because you deserve to understand exactly what you've walked into," he said, "and because I don't intend to lie to you." He started up the stairs. "Good night, Teagan." She stood alone in the underground room and listened to his footsteps disappear above her. She had walked into Rush University Medical Center at the start of a routine night shift. She had walked out the other side of something she didn't have a name for yet. Something that had taken hold of the edges of her life with a quiet, absolute certainty she was not entirely sure she had the will to fight. Or, if she was being honest with herself in the particular way that only 4 a.m. allows, the desire to... She looked at the cardiac monitor. Dario Sina's heart rate was steady and even. She had kept him alive. She picked up the phone Corvin's driver had left on the counter, found it already loaded with Eli's contact, and called her brother. He picked up on the second ring, groggy and warm-voiced, asking her why she was calling so late. She told him she was fine. She told him she'd had an interesting shift. She told him not to worry. And somewhere upstairs in the large, quiet house, Corvin Blackwell sat alone in the dark of his study and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the precise and unsettling weight of having met someone he had absolutely no intention of losing.